This is a Willets Point Shea Stadium bound 7 express train. The next and last stop is Willets Point, Shea Stadium.
Oh, yes, it is the Subway to Shea podcast. Anthony Rivera here with you, talking all the news and happenings surrounding that team from Queens, the New York Mets. Episode 166 from the Subway to Shea studios in my office. Wakey, wakey, Mets Nation. It is 10 in the morning. We're getting ready for the NLCS as the New York Mets get set to take on the Los Angeles Dodgers in LA. And here to break down this series with me is the one and only Andrew Claudio from Mets Therapy. Andrew, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great. I'm very excited that it is October 13th. There's football on, there's basketball on, there's hockey on, and yes, there's still Mets baseball on. How sweet it is. I'm excited to preview this series with you, Anthony.
You know, it's great to say it's game day in October, and also it mean that the New York Mets are playing playoff baseball here. And I got to give you kudos because the last time we spoke, it was a preview of the Milwaukee series for the wild card, and you had the Mets in 3. You got that right. You had it coming down to the wire. Like that pick, and look now where we are. So
I will say I didn't predict that they'd win the even more so dramatic way that they did, that it would be quite literally at the buzzer thanks to Pete Alonso, but I'll take it. I also thought they'd beat the Phillies. This Dodger series is a bit more complicated, but I'll take it, and I hope more things that I say come true, because if I have that power, I'll keep saying things and hopefully they come true.
Yeah, I don't want anyone to take anything away from what this Dodgers team has accomplished this season. Number 1 seed. Obviously, the Mets are the final seed in the National League, taking that 6th spot. After May 30th, both of these teams have had, and the Dodgers have been great since the beginning of the season. And the fact that they have been this good with a team that's been so injured, especially to their starting rotation. We saw what they did in the NLDS against the Padres, who have a great lineup. They threw a bullpen game in a must-win game and shut the Padres out. I mean, that cannot be taken for granted. But after May 30th, the Mets were 67-40, and the Dodgers were 62-42, top 5 in the league when it comes to records for both of these teams. Quickly, I want to go through the schedule. You got the Mets and Dodgers tonight. 8:15 on Fox. Game 2 is going to be on either Fox or FS1, and that's a 4:08 start, which is weird to me that it'd be that early, but I guess because of the Yankees and the Guardians.
That's why, yeah.
That whole situation is taking place like that. I would assume that it would have been after, like a later game like they did in 2015, but I guess not. Game 3 at Citi Field, October 16th on Wednesday, 8:08 p.m. on FS1. And then game 4 also will be on FS1. Game 5, if necessary, on either of those channels, Fox or FS1. Same thing with game 6 and game 7, which is Friday, Sunday, and Monday. We don't have the exact times for those games just yet because it's only if necessary. But we know that the Mets have at least 4 more games to play, and hopefully some more of that afterwards. And that would mean that the Mets are in the World Series. What are your initial thoughts heading into this series and what the Mets can do here to win it?
Well, so the initial thoughts and what they could do to win it are actually somewhat separate, because there's a part of me that wants to just appreciate what this team's already accomplished, and getting to the NLCS, especially where they were on May 30th, as you pointed out. They've been great. They've been elite, one of the best teams in baseball since then. But I know how we all felt on May 29th when Jorge Lopez was throwing his glove into the crowd and the broadcast was eulogizing the season. It felt like during a day game against these same Los Angeles Dodgers, and for them to turn around the season the way they have, and to get to these last 2 weeks, but really those 10 days since that Monday in Atlanta to game 4 against the Phillies, it's an accomplishment that deserves celebrating and something we remember. As far as this Dodgers series is concerned, the Dodgers have not seen this version of the Mets this year. So there's that element of surprise that I'm hoping not necessarily plays that shocks them or plays into their favor, but that, like, any Dodgers fan that's going into this, like, we took care of the Mets. This is a team we're not afraid of. We usually take care of the Mets. This is just not your average Mets that you've faced in the past. This is a very good team that has timely hitting, that has been taking advantage of some very good bullpens in this playoffs. The Brewers, the Braves, the Phillies. These are teams that had elite bullpens throughout the year, and the Mets have just gotten big hit after big hit against all of them. And now you welcome a Dodger team that is on a consecutive scoreless inning streak of 24. The final 24 innings of that series against the Padres did not score. And as you mentioned, one of those games was a bullpen game for the Dodgers. So that's my number one thing, is that trend continues to be a thing that the Mets, it's been their calling card throughout this playoffs, is that they take care of a very good bullpen and counteract it with productive at-bats, long at-bats, and ones that lead to runs late in games. Because it's weird. The Dodgers really pitch backwards. There's no starting pitcher you're going to fear. Like, oh, no, we have to be afraid that Zach Wheeler's waiting for us in game 5. No, that's not here in the series. But what is good pitcher after good pitcher after good pitcher coming out of that bullpen. So that's the number one thing, is that if the Mets can get into this Dodgers bullpen and still be productive, I think the Mets will win this series.
Shout out to the 89 people, now 90 people in this room early in the morning with us to preview this series. Carlos Ramos, Keith Diaz, my guy Keith from Shane's Sons, Aaron Blue Shirts Banter, CP from CPNY Sports. Also
CP, what's good?
Great to see you guys in here with us this early in the morning. You know, I think of this team, and it's really full circle what we're witnessing here, because you mentioned it, the Jorge Lopez throwing the glove in the stands, rock bottom. The team was 11 or 12 games under 500 at that time against this Dodgers team, where they got their butts handed to them in that series. And, you know, this is like that full circle moment once again. They finally, slayed the Braves in a must-win game. They did it in Milwaukee as well, where, it was tough to play in Milwaukee for the last 4 or 5 seasons for the Mets, and they took care of business there, slayed that demon. And then they play Philly, even though it's the first time they played them in playoff history. The Phillies have had our numbers for such a long time, and the fact that the Mets were able to take care of that team as well, if they can do the same thing against the Dodgers, and the history is quite not the same between the Mets and the Dodgers. The Mets have handled the Dodgers the last 2 playoff series, but the big one was in 1988. Thankfully, I was only 2 years old, so I didn't have to get as upset about that series as I know a lot of fans it affected, and that's one that they talk about consistently. That series in 1988 was one of the worst moments for them as Met fans. But the Mets have a big opportunity here to go into LA, and I think we said it, in Milwaukee, we said it in Philadelphia. You take game 1 of the series, or you at least split the series like when they did it against Philly, and that's a big deal for the Mets, right? It gives them an advantage, gives them home field advantage going back to Citi Field, and if they can do that, I think they will be in good standing. And you talk about, I want to get into the pitching. And what the rotations are coming into this, because it is going to be, we only know from the Mets side that Mendy really doesn't, give away anything too far in advance, but he did give away the 2 games in LA. Kodai Senga going in game 1, he'll take on Jack Flaherty. Sean Manaea in game 2 against Walker Buehler. Senga probably will pitch 3 innings, although he's very deceptive in his conversations and what he said during the press conference. I'll take the ball. I'll take the ball until they take it away from me. But he also said that in the first game. I'm pretty sure they're just going to ease him back in, work himself back up so that he can get to about 4 or 5 innings. But outside of that home run he gave up, leadoff home run to Kyle Schwarber, Senga looked pretty good in those 2 innings that he pitched against Philadelphia. And if the formula is Senga to David Peterson and then so on and so on, I think that Mets have a good chance here to, kind of switch up the balance against the, vaunted Dodgers lineup.
So Senga game 1, absolutely. It's just a whole weird wrinkle that I was not expecting going into the playoffs, let alone going into the Phillies and now this series, where our ace is back, and him being able to go 3-4 innings. Who knows how long they intend to keep him in. I don't know how you feel about this, but the playoffs are less about innings. For me, it's outs. Like if you can get 12 outs out of Senga, I think that's a win. If you can get 9, I guess that's also a win. But I'd love to get twice through this order and get into the 5th inning. So it's few times that this Mets bullpen has to face the Dodgers. Although, like you said, I'm sure they'll go to David Peterson or McGill or somebody afterwards. Look, his only start against the Dodgers last year went 6 innings, struck out 9, gave up 1 run on a primetime game on Saturday Night Baseball. I look at the Dodgers and their splits this year. They've largely killed left-handed pitching, especially with home runs. But guess what? So did the Phillies. So there's no real worry for me if you're going from Senga to Peterson that, oh no, now they're facing a type of pitcher that they've largely dominated this year. This is a different small sample that we're looking at, and it's a different, Mets team that they'll be getting a chance to face. So yeah, give me 4 innings or 12 outs from Senga twice through this order, and as long as he keeps it at 1 run like he did with the Phillies, like obviously we'd pray for scoreless, but if you can get through this order twice and the damage is not significant, then I like the Mets' chances in game 1.
I've been paying close attention. Every time the game is over, I will look at game day box score, look at the pitch count. And for the most part, this postseason, the Mets pitch counts have been very low. I know people love the strikeout, but like you said, get out of the inning. And that's something that, we saw from Sean Manaea in game 3 against the Phillies, where there were some innings where he threw under 10 pitches, and it allowed him to go into the 7th inning, which was, to me, one of his, best performances of the season, and allowed them not to have to use the pieces in the bullpen, we would thought that they had to use. So, I think that's a big part too. I know that during the season, the Mets nibbled a lot around the plate. And then especially when you're going up against a lineup that has Shea, Ohtani, Freddie Freeman, you're going to be trying to do stuff like that. I think they need to stick with the game plan, go after the hitters like they did Harper, like they did with Schwarber and Castellanos. And if they beat you, they beat you. But these guys have what it takes to get the outs. We saw it. The Phillies lineup, it's a good lineup, and they shut them down. So, the Dodgers are definitely a step higher than them, maybe a couple games higher, because I think the Phillies only finished maybe like 1 or 2 games behind them with record. But I think the Mets have an opportunity here. Stick with what you got. And I definitely want to see this starting rotation give us, like you said, those outs.
Well, so I want to push back on one thing. I actually don't think they attacked Harper enough for my liking. I thought there was a lot of pitching around him. Of the walks that the Mets gave up, I believe Bryce Harper either had 5 or 7 walks in the 4 games that they played. They largely treated this lineup like they did the Yankees lineup earlier in the year, where it was just like, we're just not letting Aaron Judge beat us the second time through when they played at Yankee Stadium. And the only person that attacked Aaron Judge that night was Jake Diekman. And it remains the most improbable outcome of a season of improbable outcomes that we've watched this year. I agree with you. They're going to have to attack Shohei Ohtani. Now, Ohtani comes into the series. It was 4 for 20 against the Padres. Did not have a great overall series. Had the big home run in game 1 and was largely absent the rest of the series. I'm not counting my chickens that they're not going to see anything from Shohei Ohtani. That he's just going to hit a home run and 3 singles in throughout the length of the series. So obviously you're taking risks if you go and attack him. But I think you got to be aggressive here. I think, especially with your slew of lefties that you have and are available out of the starting rotation to attack him, you have to go ahead and do so, especially with Mookie Betts next, especially with Freddie Freeman after him. And then like Teoscar Hernandez, the acquisition of him this offseason by the Dodgers has actually been pretty significant. And he was one of the 2 Dodgers that actually hit in the Padres series. So I do think they're going to have to be more aggressive than they were, especially when facing Bryce Harper, when it's like you got Castellanos afterwards and then a 5 through 9 that just wasn't competing in that series. This is going to be much different when they face the Dodgers in this one.
And it's definitely totally different with this Dodgers lineup because you can't even forget Kike Hernandez, who's a playoff performer. He gets lost in the mix because of the Otanis and Freemans and Betts of the world and Teoscar Hernandez. But he has been a playoff performer for a very long time, and he's going to be someone that they have to watch out for. I hope the Mets are watching the film on what the Padres did to get Shohei Ohtani. I think he had his first 3 strikeout game of the season
Yeah,
in
game
this
4.
postseason.
Either game
So
3 or game 4. Yeah.
yeah, they got to definitely hit them right where it hurts and get Ohtani out of there. You look at the rest of this series. Obviously, the Mets don't have right now the set lineup. I would assume it would be Luis Severino in game 3, Jose Quintana in game 4, unless they flip flop them. I don't know yet how that's going to be situated, but Alden Gonzalez of ESPN kind of laid out what we could possibly see from the Dodgers after Walker Buehler in game 2. He had a bullpen game for game 3. One good thing, I guess, is Yoshinobu Yamamoto is probably only going to pitch 1 game in this series, which would be game 4, unless they bring him back on short rest. But we know how things go with a pitcher like himself. Flaherty 5, Buehler 6. And then he had a bullpen game for game 7, which would, that's if necessary, obviously. But this really sets up perfectly when you're talking about pitching matchups for the Mets. And, I don't want to take the Dodgers for granted here, but they need to capitalize on the way that this rotation has been structured, if this is the correct structure right now. Because you're not even getting Walker Buehler, at his best. He's coming off of the injury last season, and he hasn't even been that great this season. But you have to capitalize.
So, like I said at the top, there's no Zach Wheeler. There's no
Yep.
big ace that we're afraid of, and not necessarily that you count those games as wins because the Mets won the game that Wheeler pitched in. But you go into that Philly series, and you would assume on paper, or outside of the Mets bubble that we're in, right? Like you'd look at it and say, well, this series has Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler pitching into these games. The Mets on paper don't have anybody as good as either of them, especially with the postseason experience as good as them. And you would assume, all right, so the Phillies should be able to win this. And the Mets won both of the games that Aaron Nola and Zach Wheeler pitched in. There's none of that in this series. Yamamoto, for as much as the Mets chased after him and as okay as he was during the season when he was healthy, got shelled in game 1 against the Padres. And then by game 5, the Padres had just decided to stop hitting. So I agree with you as far as the probables being in favor of the Mets. And then I think, look, the OMG, the grimace, the Hawk Tua, the fun stuff that we've the magic that has showed up this season. It's been great. The MVP candidacy from Lindor, the timely hitting from a lot of different guys. That's been awesome to pay attention to. Like the starting pitching has been why the Mets are where they are at the moment. And it's usually the thing that carries teams through runs like this. The Diamondbacks last year largely rode a really good 3-headed monster through the playoffs. The Phillies in their run 2 years ago also rode 3 really good starting pitchers, just going deep into games and putting up zeros. And I think the Mets, if they could continue to pitch the way they have, it's man, I can't stress this enough. The Mets have the Zach Wheeler. If Senga gets deeper and deeper into games and they're able to throw him out for game 5 and he's able to go 5-6 innings, like the Mets have the best pitcher in the series then. So I now go out there thinking that the Mets having the pitching advantage is a strength. And it's what'll probably win them the series if they win it.
It's crazy to think that from September on through this playoffs that the best pitcher on this team right now has been Jose Quintana, and he's been a part of, 2 clinchers here. And the fact that you'll have him probably, I don't know if I would throw him in a game 3 or a game 4, because you would want him to come back and be able to pitch, if necessary. So Jose Quintana has been such an important part of why this team is where it is in this last month and a half. And who would you go with in game 3? Would it be Luis Severino? Would you go Quintana game 3 or game 4?
I'd go Severino game 3. I think he's been largely good at home this year as well. Quintana, and I'm glad our buddy CP is watching, because I went on with him during the month of September when Quintana was only like 13 innings into this stretch that he's in. And I said that I thought Quintana's little streak was cute, but 6 of these innings came against the White Sox, who are not a professional baseball team. And I think if he could just give up some depth down the stretch, great, but he shouldn't throw a meaningful inning for us in the month of October. And lo and behold, not only is he throwing a meaningful inning, but he's thrown like 11 of the most important innings of the season in October, between the 6 innings in the deciding game against Milwaukee and in the clincher, getting them a couple times through the order. So I would still keep Quintana in the rotation, but look, the broadcast, as much as we all, I think, had our frustrations with the Adam Amin, Adam Wainwright, AJ Pierzynski team throughout that series, I actually thought they hit on a good point that the Phillies largely got themselves out, and that's how Quintana was able to get through the lineup as often as he did. I don't know if you're necessarily going to get that from this Dodgers team, and Quintana has had a struggle with keeping the ball in the ballpark at times. And this is a Dodger team that hit more home runs against lefties than any other team this year. So limiting him to 1 start, twice through the order, if he's cruising and they're winning, maybe you try to go at least throw Ohtani and Freeman that 3rd time through. And that's what you want from him, is that portion of this series is what you're going to need from him. And I just flatly also trust Severino and the other guys they have available more. So that would be how I'd use Quintana in this series.
Yeah, we can't forget Severino had a really good start to game 2 against the Phillies, outside of those 3 pitches where he was challenging Harper and Castellanos.
If you're going to challenge Bryce Harper, just don't do it right down the middle.
Which
was Severino's issue. I think the Severino, like you said, the Severino that we got for those first 5 2/3 was great. And now let's hope we get him like that against the Dodgers too, where if you're challenging guys, you're being more effective and more efficient with your pitches.
Shout out everyone in the chat, 182 of you guys in the room here. Carlos Ramos, hit that like video and subscribe to Subway to Shea. Please subscribe as well to Mets Therapy. Also on YouTube, shout out to Stevie Mack, Yuki Matsui in here. We got a Dodgers fan, Jeffrey Saito, in here saying, these playoff games have been so good. I expect the Mets to make this series interesting. Good luck. Same to you as well. You're looking forward to Danny Espinosa saying, looking forward to another high-scoring series here. So, it's going to be a lot of fun watching these guys go at it. And, I want to talk about a player that is possibly making this roster. We don't know what the rosters are yet, but the return of Jeff McNeil looks like it's probably happening here. He played pretty good during the Arizona, fall league kind of games that they had out there, just to get himself back in the mix to see how he was doing. He may be coming back here. And, who is it that you drop from this roster? Because a lot of people, thought, oh, maybe it's Luis Angel Acuna. Maybe he's the one that gets dropped. But I think the fact that he provides speed, he provides late inning defense, like we've seen in all the games he's been put into. They put him in at 2nd. They put Iglesias at 3rd. I trust his, defense a lot, especially what we saw down the stretch from him. So then it comes down to, I think, 2 pitchers that, have not seen any part of the postseason. And you look at Adam Ottavino and Danny Young, and it's really a toss-up. Danny Young has had an awful last month and a half. And Adam Ottavino, although he's a veteran, he just looks out of it. Like, I don't know, like who is it that you think that the Mets should replace to bring in Jeff McNeil?
It has to be Danny Young. Acuna, as you mentioned, there's a speed aspect to it. I think in game 4, there was a portion of the game that I actually, Carlos Mendoza has pushed mostly every right button this year. There are moments where I understand his process, but I disagree with it. And JD Martinez leads off with a single in the 6th inning. And I'm like, you got to run for him here. That's the tying run. You need to run for him there. I understand Mendy likes to go to that line change at the end of games and put his best defensive lineup out there, which great. I'm actually all for that. I'm okay with Vientos coming out of games late, although his arm actually is a pretty good weapon.
Yeah.
It's his range that I think that they're going for, and you want to make sure you have your best gloves out there down the stretch. But because you like to go to that line change, you have no one really to run for JD Martinez in that spot. If you have Acuna and he's just there to run for JD, then you have one of your faster players able to be a base runner in that spot. And like, he could potentially steal a base. He hasn't really tried much in his limited major league career, but the point is that you're able to keep that speed on the bases as a potential weapon in this series. And I just flatly don't think we're going to see Danny Young in an important spot. I think if they're going to need length from their bullpen, this is why McGill is on the roster. This is why, like for extra innings, I'm saying, like, this is why McGill's here. This is why David Peterson is here, and you'll try to get length out of them. I'm not going to say I trust Adam Ottavino more so than Danny Young. I'll go with the guy with more experience in
Last
in
resort.
that case.
Last
right,
resort.
like
16 or down 8 runs.
He's someone that, like, if you're, like you said, if you're down 3 and you want to put him out there, you hope that you get a 1-2-3 inning out of him. I don't want to gloss over the last day of the season where he did go in and get a 1-2-3 inning against the Braves, and that did keep it at 3-0 going into that 8th inning, which obviously we all remember ended up being one of the more fun innings of the season. So I would trust him more so than Danny Young, and I'd want to keep Acuna and his speed on the roster. So if you're, especially since Mendy can then still keep the line change available because now McNeil is back, and then Iglesias can go over to third base. So it'd be Danny Young as far as I would go. How about you?
I agree. I think it has to be Danny Young here. Adam Ottavino's, I guess, experience gives him the leg up here, although he has not pitched well in pressure situations. That is spanning back to that 2022 playoff game where they had like a 4-run lead and he couldn't get the last couple of outs of the game. And he's been, not as reliable since then, especially in 2023 and this season. So, I still would keep him over a Danny Young. With the emergence of David Peterson becoming more reliable lefty out of the bullpen, I think it's a better situation. And I assume too, like you said, that in this series, maybe Jose Quintana also is one of those guys that if they need him in a pinch, he would come out of the bullpen. So you got 2 lefties there as well. And Luis Angel Acuna needs there to be their speed, defense. I remember in 2022, they had someone, was it Terrence Gore, that he was just there to run the bases and that was it. I think Acuna is a little more talented than that and can do more stuff. But you always need a guy like that on the roster for the Mets. Where are you playing Jeff McNeil? I don't think he starts. Like, he's not starting game. I don't think he's going to start game 1. I can't see it happening unless he's going to be a DH, but then you're kind of sitting Winker at this moment in time. Like, where do you play him? Because Marte's been fine in the outfield, and I'm not a big Marte in the outfield guy, since I think his range is not as good as it used to be. But, where does Jeff McNeil play with, as well as Jose Iglesias has been playing in at second base? Mark Vientos ain't going anywhere. And then all you could think of is the outfield, and you got to play Tyrone Taylor in center field. The only thing I could think of is Marte against the right-handed pitcher. Maybe he does. Maybe he does play against a Flaherty or a Walker Buehler. But like, I just don't know like where he fits in, because I really don't want to mess up the roster construction. I think they have been fine the way they are right now.
So can we talk about Starling Marte for a second? Because it feels like he's been in the middle of every big inning that they've had this playoffs. It feels like all of his hits have mattered. And that's because they have. All 4 of his hits in these playoffs, the one he had against the Phillies was the 2-run single in to make it 4-0. He had the single in the top of the 9th against after Pete Alonso's home run to make it 4-2, that insurance run. He had a single in the inning against the Brewers in game 1 that was big. That's drove in runs. And then he had another one against the Brewers in game 2 that drove in a run. So I think that clutch ability from a veteran is big. It also can't be ignored that he's not really walking a ton. And he had one hit in the series against the Phillies. It was a huge hit. Don't get me wrong. It was huge. I'm not saying like he suddenly should become a part-time player, but I actually think he's the spot. And if you face a tough lefty late in the game and they bring him in to face McNeil, then starting Marte right there if you want to. And then you just do your line change. And that's the flexibility that Jeff McNeil potentially adds to your roster when you bring him in. So I actually think him in right field is the option if you want to go to it. Iglesias, I think, has earned every day at bats throughout the series. If he's like 0 for 9 through 2 or 3 games, maybe you gave him a day. Tyrone Taylor, for as great as his defense has been, and I think it is a weapon, like him and his range and being, it's certainly better than Brandon Nimmo in center field. But if you did want to give a more dependable bat a day or a lineup, a day in the lineup in a big game, you could put Tyrone Taylor sitting. And I think those are the options that like there's no sitting of Vientos. There's no DHing, obviously, because then you lose their ability to play, like their specifically McNeil's ability to play in the field later. I would, it's a combination of Marte or Tyrone Taylor or who's the last one I'm missing? Or Iglesias if you wanted to. And I think Marte would be the one I would sit if you wanted to go that route.
I think this is also good to keep a guy like Iglesias fresh. I mean, he obviously he doesn't need it, but you saw in game 4 pressing a little bit, especially in big spots where you're like, man, he would definitely get a hit here. I think to have that extra player in McNeil who's versatile can help out, especially deep into games. Carlos Ortiz saying bring him in for defense in the later innings at second when making the defensive moves. Keith Diaz saying my perfect vision for McNeil's off the bench. Nobody has a weapon like that coming off the bench late in a high leverage situation. And Carlos Ramos saying starring Marte has found himself in the postseason and we're all loving it. LGM. Yeah, look, I agree. I think that Marte is the guy that's kind of the odd man out. And I think that's the perfect situation when you deepen that bench to the fact where, oh, all right, let's go to Starling Marte on the bench. I think that's pretty huge. You got Marte, you'll have JD Martinez, although he has not had the postseason we would like, but he's still somewhat of the threat. He's had the experience in postseasons for so long. Jesse Winker as well. So the Mets have their options there, and this only helps them throughout this series, which now moves to 7 games and is a lot tighter now for them moving forward. So we'll see what happens with Jeff McNeil. Hopefully it is a positive, outcome, bringing him back into the fold.
So I have a question. Why has JD Martinez not had the postseason that we would have liked, but Marte has? I don't even know if you were making that point. I don't even know if you were saying that Marte has had the postseason we would have liked, but like JD Martinez has had some big run scoring hits too. Like he had the 2-run hit against the Brewers to give him the lead. He had the 2-run hit again, or the run scoring hit against the Phillies to lengthen the lead. And he had the leadoff single in the 6th inning against Hoffman that led to the Lindor grand slam. And they both have like the same number of hits throughout the first 7 games of the playoffs so far.
I think it's more of, he's the big DH. He has the most experience. There have been some big spots where he has not come through using his power. I think I expected more.
So the power's not there.
Yeah, the power is not there right now with him, and it kind of hasn't been there for probably a good 2 months. Obviously, he had that good May, June, help turn the team around, which will not be lost in the fold when we look at the end of this season and how far the Mets have come. But he has really lost like that power stroke that we all know him for and why we signed him.
So it's that he's largely been Starling Marte, but Marte can at least play the field is what we're okay. I don't fully disagree. I think they're about equal to me. I think they're both kind of DHs, honestly. And Marte's just ability to play the field lets you like 1% better and be an outfielder allows you to keep him in a little bit more and keep his bat in the lineup if he was producing. They've both largely been the same in these playoffs and have come up in some big spots and either come through or not. And it's why I think JD Martinez has a perfect spot. If you've got a lefty on the mound, then you put him out there and potentially give him an at bat. Winker's your DH against righties. And it's why I think, to the context of Jeff McNeil, that we started this conversation. If you wanted him to be in there against righties as well, Marte is the option. And then you have two really good veteran right-handed at-bats that have gotten some big hits for you in this playoffs available to come off the bench.
Yeah, I think it works. It works very well for the Mets with all the depth there, because either those two are coming off the bench or Winker and McNeil are coming off the bench. And this Mets team has come so far from the, Lindor, Alonso, or bust type of lineup, right? Like, back the last couple years, it's the Mets lineup goes as Lindor and Alonso go. And that doesn't seem to be the case this season. And it doesn't seem to be the case in this postseason, where they've gotten contributions from Mark Vientos and Jose Iglesias and Winker, Marte and JD Martinez to that certain extent. So the lineup is pretty full for the Mets, and hopefully they're able to pick apart this Dodgers pitching staff like they did to the Phillies and like they did to the Milwaukee Brewers. And Keith Diaz saying, "I love this team's depth right now." Yeah, the team's depth is one of its strengths. Now, I haven't watched too much of Dodgers baseball to know what they're, if they have that deep in of a lineup. But they got Gavin Lux as well, and they have Will Smith. So, they have a long lineup as well. I think this is probably one of the more even, I guess, matchups when it comes to lineups outside of Ohtani being Ohtani, although he hasn't been for the playoffs. But, you look at who's been going tit for tat with him, and it's that MVP battle between Francisco Lindor and Shohei Ohtani. For the season, Lindor 273 batting average, 33 homers, 91 RBIs, 29 stolen bases, and an 844 OPS. I really think he would have gotten 30-30 if he didn't hurt his back. I think he would have ran a little bit more towards those last couple of games of the season. Ohtani, 310, 54 homers, 130 RBIs, and 59 stolen bases. I think we have never seen that before in any type of baseball season. Got a 1.036 OPS in the playoffs. 259, 1 homer, 6 RBIs, 863 OPS for Lindor. And as you mentioned earlier, Ohtani only batting 200, a homer and 4 RBIs. But that home run was a big one, because that could have taken them out of this series, and it helped them win that game. 623 OPS. You look at this battle of, I guess, the Titans here between Ohtani and Lindor. What are you looking forward to most from seeing these two? Obviously, we want to shut down Ohtani for sure and see Lindor thrive. Outside of this battle here that's brewing between these two for MVP, and I assume that they're not going to include this postseason. They're not. I don't think they're supposed to include the postseason.
Oh no, the voting's already been.
The voting's already in.
Yeah,
right?
It's already done. You hand in your ballot before the first playoff game.
You know what? Ohtani can have the MVP of the season, and Lindor wins MVP of the NLCS. That'll mean a lot more, I think, to him and the Met fans as well. What are your thoughts going into this kind of battle? It's kind of like made for TV. Like, you could not have asked for anything better. Dodgers, Mets, Lindor, Ohtani, especially with the seasons that they've had.
Well, I agree with you that I couldn't have asked for anything more, and we couldn't have asked for anything more than Lindor versus Ohtani from a National League MVP conversation. I can assume that Major League Baseball is rooting for Ohtani versus Judge in the World Series. As far as what more could you ask for? Although I think they'll settle for New York being the capital of the baseball world if we get a World Series between the Mets and the Yankees, but that's obviously a round away. Look, I am not naive to think that Ohtani's going to go 4 for 20 in this series or hit 200 in this series. I am not someone that thinks he's similar to Bryce Harper. Like, you just got to attack him and see what happens, because I think the Dodgers lineup after Ohtani is much better, and they've created this cushion behind him that if you want to just let him walk 7 times, then okay, go ahead, take your chances with Mookie Betts or Freddie Freeman or Teoscar Hernandez. I do think that we will see the MVP argument that Mets fans were making in August and September play out, in that if Ohtani goes 0 for 4 with 3 strikeouts, like he did in one game against the Padres, and Lindor potentially also goes 0 for 4 in said game, Lindor might have 2 or 3 plays in the field that are impactful and get them out of an inning or lead to a double play. And that's always been the argument, is that Lindor can go 0 for 4 and then still impact the game positively. And that is, I think, what will be, if you're leaning Lindor to be an X factor in this series, it's that his defense will just continue to be a plus for the Mets. And that also, to just the conversation we just had, that's why you keep Iglesias at second base, as well as you have 2 Gold Glove caliber middle infielders just creating outs as they go. And it's why I think McNeil in the outfield is the potential way to go. But what we won't see is Ohtani play the outfield. Anthony, I personally prefer that I know whether or not my MVP has a baseball glove. Like, do you know if Ohtani still owns a baseball? I haven't seen it this year, so I have no idea whether or not he owns a baseball glove.
And there's also, you can win the best offensive player, like, and silver slut. Like, I just don't get it. He has not played. I don't want to call him a one-trick pony, because he's not. I mean, he can pitch, and I'm pretty sure that'll come back either next season or whenever they decide to have him throw again. But right now, he's a one-trick pony. He just hits.
Fair. I come from the basketball world as well. Shout out Knicks Film School. Steph Curry was a bit of a one-trick pony, but he did the trick better than anybody in NBA history. So I listen, I actually think Ohtani's the MVP when his offense was so valuable that it overrode over the large 162 game sample size what Lindor did in the field. In this small sample, when an 0 for 4 can absolutely happen, a 4 for 20 series can absolutely happen, Lindor has the defensive edge. Like, he has that ability to impact in other ways if the Dodgers are getting him out. So I think that small sample of this series could play out that way. And I think, look, Lindor's also just flat out had every big hit that I think we've needed him to get this year. Like, the one he hit against the Phillies might be the 3rd biggest hit that we've seen from him over the last month, between the home run. So the 4 big ones I go to over the last 2 months, there's the home run against the Diamondbacks, the day against the day after Diaz blew that save, which ends up being a pretty significant home run, because it led to them winning that game against the Diamondbacks, leading to where we are today in the Mets beating out the Diamondbacks for a playoff berth. And then obviously the one against the Blue Jays, the one against the Braves, and the one on Wednesday against the Phillies. Ohtani's big home runs, big 3rd inning home run against the Padres aside, it's like, oh, you hit a couple home runs against the Marlins. Great. Like, I think Lindor's just flatly been better in high leverage situations. So I know the numbers do say Ohtani's been good, but as far as significant moments that we can point to, I think Lindor's going to come through, and I have the confidence he's going to come through anytime that the Mets necessarily need him to, whether that be a big at bat or a big defensive play.
They finished for a 3-way tie for the final 2 spots of the wild card. Diamondbacks getting eliminated because of the tie break. So, like you said, that big home run was huge. You look at the home run in Toronto when they were getting no hit in the 9th, huge. The Braves one, huge. This Phillies one, another. Like, they have been, astronomically huge home runs for this Mets team. And to be honest, we haven't really seen Lindor at his best offensively in the playoffs. He's had very important, kind of like Marte, he has had very important parts, drawing walks to get into that Pete Alonso home run. Same thing in the Phillies game that led to the or the base hit that he had in Philly that led to the game tying home run from Mark Vientos. So, like, he has had some important things, but he hasn't been on fire, we've seen him in the past, but he has had the big important hits that the Mets needed.
He's been in the middle of every big rally that they've had throughout this playoffs, whether it be a big walk or a big hit to continue the rally, or That's why the Grand Slam was so significant, because I don't know where you were when that happened, or if you were at the game or what have you, but like I was on my couch and I was
Me
like,
too.
Lindor's so like I think Lindor's gonna walk here. Like that's how they're gonna continue this inning. Is they're gonna like the way they got on base was largely the Phillies bullpen being wild, and then you strike out Alvarez, you bring in your closer, and like Lindor's gonna have a good at bat here, and he did more than have a good at bat. He hit the ball over the fence, and I think that's why it was such a climax and an exclamation point on what Lindor has been. That it's like, no, what this team needs is a 3-run lead right now. They can't just tie the game. They've been so bad with runners in scoring position all night. They need 4 runs on one swing. And he got it done. And to your point about like him not necessarily hitting well so far in the playoffs, it was his first home run of the playoffs. He's had a couple extra base hits, but he's largely been a guy that's walked throughout this series. Like outside of Alonso, who at times they'll pitch around, which, I mean, do your homework. Alonso has actually been someone you don't have to necessarily pinch around throughout this season, although he's thankfully picked it up in the playoffs. But the guy's got 6 walks to go along with his 7 hits throughout this postseason for Lindor. And look, like Martinez, like they're not really contributing with the Marte Martinez, Nimmo, like some of these other guys that have just largely gotten a hit here and there. They've all been in big moments, but it's been with Lindor on the bases in these situations. So you hope that trend continues.
Lindor, that's his second Grand Slam in his postseason career. He had one with
we all know the first one. We all remember the first one from
yeah.
2017 against the Yankees.
Yeah, we won't forget that. We won't forget this one. Look, I thought it was beautifully hit off the bat. I know that Estevez blew one right past him about 2 pitches beforehand, and then he just left it over the plate. I actually thought it was just a hit in the gap, but when you see those guys, I don't even know why they were spread. Like they weren't even close to being able to make some type of play there. But thankfully, it just went over the wall, and we didn't have to worry about that. So the Mets won that, and that's all that matters. Carlos Ramos saying it's the most valuable player award, not the best hitter award. That's what the Silver Slugger's for. Give him the Platinum Slugger for all I care, but the MVP of the National League is Francisco Lindor. I tend to agree with that. Even as crazy as the season that Ohtani has had, I think it should go to Lindor considering the defense. But like I said, give him that MVP. I'd rather have Lindor be the MVP of the NLCS, which means we have probably went to the World Series. So we'll see how this battle of the Titans play out between these two here. But let's get into some Mets X factors for this series. What are the X factors for you watching what we've seen so far from the Mets in the postseason?
Keep taking advantage of good bullpens. Like keep being productive about with your hitting against a good bullpen. The Dodgers, as I mentioned, finished top 10 in ERA. Largely had a great outing from their bullpen throughout the Padres series that they just had. I'll read the number again for those just joining. The Dodgers ERA in the bullpen from their bullpen against the Padres in 24 and a third innings pitched, 2.22. The final 24 innings of the Dodgers series against the Padres did not score. Only 5 of those innings came from a starting pitcher in Yamamoto. This is a Mets team that has taken advantage of 3 of the top 11 bullpens in baseball throughout the playoffs so far. And I'm including that Braves game as like part of the bullpens that they would taken advantage of. Getting into scoring runs against Iglesias, scoring runs against, I forget the guy that they brought in before him, but then you score runs against a Brewers bullpen that was pretty great, top 5, and then a Phillies bullpen that just has flamethrowers left and right, all-stars left and right. They're gonna have to do it again against the Dodgers. And then on the Mets side of things, from pitching, your starting rotation is gonna have to continue to carry you. Keep putting up zeros. Keep avoiding their bullpen as much as your own bullpen, I should say, as much as possible. I don't know how you feel, Anthony. I am back and forth on Edwin Diaz. Again, I'm coming from the basketball world where the Knicks just traded Julius Randle, and the Randle experience was always like, if he's confident and level-headed, I think the Knicks are going to have a good chance. There's also the wild card that it gets in his head that he's having a frustrating night, and it will affect everything the Knicks do. And it seems like, and he's spoken to this, Edwin Diaz, if he goes to the mound thinking no one can hit me, no one hits him. If he's trying to be too perfect and nibble around the strike zone, then that's where you get to walks. That's where you get to leaving pitches in the middle of the plate. And it's why you have him forgetting to cover first base in an inning where he gives up 3 runs against the Braves. Then the defiance of like, no, I'm going out there for the 9th inning. And then he shuts down the Braves to win the series, the last game, and get into the playoffs. And then walking to Phillies, and then the defiance of, you know what, they can't hit me. And then he strikes out 2 of the next 3 batters to win the series. So I'm back and forth on how much we trust Edwin Diaz. I hope the confident one comes out of the pen when he eventually comes in. I don't know if he's the confidence rating is anything above like 75 at this point. He's still our closer. I still want him there and in there in big spots, but it's like David Peterson, Reed Garrett, kinda, and then close your eyes and pray for the rest of this pen, which is why I think you need some depth out of your starting rotation in this series.
Yeah, and that's why the X factor for me is the starting rotation. They're going to set the tone. They need to be getting these big outs at least twice, at the very minimum, twice around the lineup. They need to be getting these outs to help not only this bullpen here, but Edwin Diaz as well, because I don't want Edwin Diaz coming in the 7th inning. We don't need to be seeing that. They need to have a little bit more confidence in these other guys getting these big outs. Obviously, it made sense at the time because he owns Schwarber, but then you're kind of leaving yourself hang dry because you had to go to Tyler McGill in late innings when it's not a guy that typically goes those times around the order. So yeah, the starting rotation is huge coming up this series. They have the advantage over the Dodgers starting rotation. We already talked about it earlier on in the show. If you missed it, you can go rewind it back. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify to listen that way as well. It's going to be huge for the Mets rotation to get these big outs. If I told you at the beginning of the postseason that the Mets were going to go on this run and the 3 best pitchers out of the bullpen were Reed Garrett, Ryan Stanek, and David Peterson. I don't know if anyone would have thought that would be happening, but it is. I mean, they are the 3 best pitchers right now out of the bullpen. It looks like Reed Garrett is April Reed Garrett again, which is great. Ryan Stanek has been a playoff performer in the past, and he's been the best pitcher, to come in these 1 inning, parts that he has to come in. And David Peterson has given us, that long length that you need out of the bullpen when a starter doesn't go deep into games. Edwin Diaz thrives off of emotion. Always has, always will. I think that he needs a game, a nice, 2 strikeout save, or if he strikes out the side save to get him going again. I mean, there's no excuses about rest anymore, right? Like they've gotten their 3 days of rest. He should be ready to go. He should be fresh. He needs like a game, maybe game 1 or game 2, whatever game in LA, to get a nice clean inning to get himself going again. I think that game 2 in Philly scared him off a little bit. And that's why he came back in game 4 and was doing the nibbling again and the walking again and not trusting his fastball that, Hefner and Lindor had to tell him, throw your fastball, let's get the out and let's move on. So I think that if he avoids the nibbling and all that stuff and throws his fastball like he knows he can throw it, you saw that last pitch, 101. That was, I think, the fastest he's thrown all season long. So if he can gain that confidence, I think it's big for them. When you look at the lineup, obviously Lindor is a big factor here. You're getting a lot of righties, right? Flaherty, Buehler, Yamamoto. So Lindor becomes huge hitting from the left side. Nimmo becomes a huge part of this series. Winker and Iglesias, and obviously Jeff McNeil, if he comes in late and can poke a hit here or there, that becomes huge. And who knows, maybe McNeil still has a little bit of that power stroke that we saw from him at the beginning of the second half of the season to help this Mets pull through. I think as well, Mark Vientos is a guy that has been kind of like
the best hitter.
He's been their best hitter and to me, he kind of still is like this rookie player who, didn't get a lot of bats in 2022 or 2023 and finally comes into his own this season. And the bright lights I've said this multiple times on the podcast. The bright lights of the postseason have not affected him whatsoever. So he becomes a big part of this lineup and what can happen moving forward in this series.
Yeah, I largely agree with you, like you said, about the rotation. And like I was actually someone that I was begging for Diaz to come in the 7th inning. I wanted him for Schwarber. And the thought was that if you get through that meat of the order one more time, the Schwarber, Turner, Harper, Castellanos part with Diaz, then bring in Stanek or McGill for these guys in the bottom of the Phillies order that just haven't been hitting for the last 3 weeks. And, you at least use your best weapon or your best bullet for their best bats. And I think that's where the rest will do the Mets a favor, hopefully. And look, I obviously I made the Julius Randle comp. The emotion that Edwin Diaz pitches with is a key. We don't want it to be an X factor, but hopefully, like you mentioned, hopefully he needs a 1-inning save where he strikes out 2 to get the save, right? Well, what did he just do against the Phillies? He struck out 2 in a save to send the Mets to the NLCS. So you're hoping that's the confidence boost he needed. A reminder, oh yeah, they can't hit me if I just throw my best pitches. So hopefully he gets that opportunity tonight as well against the Dodgers. And in game 1, he gets a big save and strikes out 2 or strikes out the side, and you get it from there. And yeah, it's not just all on Lindor. The Mets don't have this one hitter that the Phillies have to fear. They're getting contributions from up and down this lineup in timely spots. So we'll see what happens.
Yuki Matsui saying Mets have X factors. The fans at Citi Field, they're going to be huge. 3 games we got. They got to be loud. They got to be proud. They got to be screaming to the depths of Citi Field, and make it kind of like how Shea Stadium was during the playoffs, when you thought that the place was going to absolutely collapse. So they did a great job in this series, sticking with them throughout the every game. I know it got a little bit quiet during game 4, but they came through, and they did good by this team here. And I think that the emotions that took place once the series was over, I'll always remember just watching Brandon Nimmo stand there, and you could see it on the big screen, and him just going, wow, and just looking at the crowd. They know how important this is, not only to themselves, but to this franchise, to this fan base, to Mets Nation, as we're called now, thanks to Francisco Lindor. So I think that they will be a big part here. Real quickly, the Dodgers X factors here. I think it's obviously the top of the lineup is very big for the Dodgers, as well as their bullpen. Those are the 2 big things that the Mets need to worry about, is being able to get out the big bats at the top of the lineup, as well as, paying cautious attention as well to the Kike Hernandezes of the world and the Will Smiths, who tend to give the Mets trouble. But like you said, being able for the Mets to hit into that bullpen that has basically shut out a very good Padres lineup. The Mets have to be patient like they were in Philly and take care of business.
Yeah, the Dodgers bullpen just flatly has to be better than the bullpens the Mets have faced and continue the trend that they had against the Padres. I look at, as far as hitters are concerned, you bring up Will Smith. Will Smith was 2 for 16 against the Padres, so he might be due. He did get a couple walks, so like the on base is at least there. But the run producer that he's been against the Mets in the past, you have to hope that shows up again. Speaking of run producers against the Mets in the past, Freddie Freeman plays for the Los Angeles Dodgers. Mm-hmm. So my hope is that the Chipper Jones like affinity for beating performing well against the Mets does not return. But if you're a Dodger fan, you have to hope that Freddie Freeman feels very comfortable getting big at bats and getting big hits against the Mets, even at Citi Field. I know he's also not 100%, so you're gonna have to hope that he is able to perform at some modicum of health in this series. And look, they didn't really hit, but they did slug in the series against the Padres. So if you only get a couple hits a game, but 3 of them leave the yard, then that's huge. That's part of the formula for the Dodgers to win games. So the biggest thing for the Dodgers is keep slugging, maybe even slug with guys on base, and hopefully your bullpen is as effective against the Mets as it was against the Padres.
Before we get to predictions and wrap up this show, Carlos Ramos had a question. And Andrew, are we keeping Phil Maton away from the 7th and 8th innings? Do we agree? I think we do.
He's out of the circle of trust. Very simply, he's out of the circle of trust.
To me, it's Reed Garrett and then Ryan Stanek. Ryan Stanek is going to be the setup guy. If it's up to me, it would be him.
Where are you on Butto? Where are you on Jose Butto?
It's the way they use him is the problem. Are you bringing him in to pitch 2 innings and if that's so, then he gets 3 days off, right? Like the formula has been there. The notes have been taken on what makes Butto tick, and he's still in that transition phase of starter reliever. And if he's going to pitch 2 good innings, you're kind of losing him, and you know that you're losing him for the next 2 or 3 days. Like I want him as fresh as possible, because when he is as fresh as possible, he's shown that he's been pretty dominant. So he's teetering for me. But as we saw in the past 2 series, it's been Reed Garrett and Stanek who have been able, and maybe at some point Butto gets to that Reed Garrett stage, because we know Reed Garrett can pitch multiple innings, and he's done that on multiple days without having so much rest. So for me, it's Garrett, Stanek. Butto's kind of there. I got to see how he's doing, but his pitch selection and his unable to throw strikes is a little concerning, especially with Edwin Diaz not being 2022 Edwin Diaz. So he's teetering. But Maton is out for me. He could pitch a 5th inning or whatever. Maybe they're down a couple runs or what. So I need to see him gain confidence, because I don't know if it's just his face that looks always scared, but he just doesn't look confident in his stuff right now.
He hasn't been effective, and it's a combination of giving up walks, giving up hits, not striking out guys, like balls leaving the yard. Maton's out of the circle of trust as far as I'm concerned. So Butto has the bad inning against the Brewers where he gives up 2 home runs. He also has a really good outing against the Brewers in game 1 of that series, was part of that stretch. I believe he pitched 2 scoreless perfect innings.
Yeah, that was game
series.
1.
Right. So game 1, you're looking at a larger sample of him being good. Him getting jumped on back-to-back pitches by a combination of Jake Bauers and Sal Frelick, which that's the playoffs being random for you. And then the outing against the Phillies, it's 2/3 of an inning where he hit JT Realmuto. It's one of the 3 times Realmuto got on base, and it was 2 walks, 1 by Diaz and a hit by pitch against Butto, and then he gives up the hit to Kobe Clemens. I actually think I have a little more confidence in Butto, but I agree with the order that you're saying, is that it's Reed Garrett 1, Stanek 2, Butto 3. I wouldn't put him in the Maton category whatsoever. Wait,
no.
If Maton pitches the 6th inning, I'll be terrified. Maton is your 10th inning. We have to turn to somebody before Ottavino category.
And it sucks that it's gotten that way, because he's been a very good playoff performer. He's lights out until he had to pitch, 6 innings in 5 days. I mean, once he did, I think that maybe he got burnt. I think he did get burnt. He
might have. Yeah. And I also think it's somewhat to his style. And this is where, the analytics crowd would say, we've been saying this for weeks, but because he's more of a contact pitcher, and his curveball was great, especially down the stretch. But to your point about him maybe being used a ton, this is a guy that largely depends on making weak contact and getting outs. And the more tired you are, the less effective your contact pitches are, because the contact will get harder and harder. The ball's finding the middle of the plate. He's a strategic, I see Carlos Ortiz saying Butto is a strategic move. I think Maton's the strategic, we either need 1 out and we'll trust Maton, or we're in the 11th inning and we're out of pitchers. I think Butto could still give them effective innings. He hasn't walked anybody yet this postseason. This isn't a guy that throughout the season we ever really had to worry about. And if you use him for 2 innings, that means you're not using Reed Garrett or Stanek or Diaz or someone else, and you can go to your other more productive arms throughout the rest of the series. So I'd almost have him like ready to go in game 1 if you need an inning or two. And maybe that means Peterson's available for a day later, or you have to use Diaz for less outs or Garrett for less outs. So I still have faith in Jose Butto. Now, watch him give up the big home run tonight, and this looks very stupid, but I just wanted to make the case for Jose Butto.
Yeah, I think also he's good for extra innings. If you need a guy to give you multiple innings, I think that's a guy that I look into. Obviously, David Peterson's going to get into the game a whole lot earlier, especially in game 1 tonight. We'll probably see him. But at the very least, you have him and McGill who can give you multiple innings. I don't know if the Dodgers pitching staff can do that when it comes to their bullpen, is have guys that if this game gets deep, and we saw it in 2015 with the Mets where, they went into the 14th, 15th inning, the ghost runner's gone, right? Like there's no ghost runner in the postseason. So they have a couple of guys that can give you a length if you have to go into extra innings. Hopefully it doesn't end up that way. And this pitching staff gets the rest and whatever they need to get them to the World Series. Let's talk about the NLCS predictions here. I have a couple of people in the chat that posted their predictions. We'll get into them as well. But what are you predicting this series goes here? I've seen a lot of people in the media predict a lot of the Dodgers, and they gave good answers as to what, the Dodgers lineup and all that stuff. The people that predicted for the Mets, it's the grimace Mets. It's the magic Mets, the pumpkin, nothing about, the pitching staff or, the lineup, none of that stuff. So how do you have this playing out for the Mets in this series? Do they win the series? Your honest assessment of predicting this series.
So again, I'm riding the high and the consistency, the streak of getting the Brewers series right, I guess. Although I did think the Mets would win the Philly series. The last home series they played against the Phillies let me know they knew how to pitch to this lineup. I'll say this. I do think a shorter series favors the Mets. A lot longer series favors the Dodgers because it means they get back to LA. So I'd rather make my prediction. If the Mets win, here's how I think it would have to happen. So I will say Mets in 5 or 6. They would have to win this thing at home, or if they get to LA, they're just out of pitching. But if they get to a game 7, I mean that's probably going to be Severino in that game 7. I'm not saying I don't
all
have
hands
confidence.
on deck.
It's all hands on deck, but like Manaea is not going to be available for game 7 because he would have pitched the day before.
Although,
but I would have liked him in game 6.
We've seen crazier things in past postseasons.
We have, but that's Randy. Like Randy Johnson is the only one I can remember pitched on 0 days rest after going 9 innings the day before.
Did Bumgarner do it too?
Bumgarner had 2 days off though. He pitched game 5 and then the day off, and then game 6 happened. Then he came in game 7. So you're looking at Manaea potential. Like it would have been like if Strasburg, after going 8 1/3 against the Astros in the World Series in 2019, then came back the next day. So I think the Mets will them in 5 if they're going to win this series is what I'll predict. I don't love a 7-game series in this series, eventually leading to the Mets winning. I'm flat out there. I think Mets in 5, if they're going to win it, would have to be what happens.
I had my first prediction wrong. I said Mets in 2 against Milwaukee. It ended up being Mets in 3. You got that one. I said Mets in 4 against the Phillies. Got that one correct. I'm going to say Mets in 6 here. I think the Dodgers take 2 games here. I don't want to take anything away from this Dodgers team. We got to remember that pitching staff, that starting rotation has been decimated, and they still figured out a way in, not the easiest divisions either, right? I mean, because the Padres were there with them till the end. So was the Diamondbacks trying to get into a playoff spot. So they still did have to fight some of these teams off here to get as far as they did. And the fact that they, against the wall, needing 2 games, they go to a bullpen game in game 4, Yamamoto in game 5, and figure out a way to shut down the Padres, like completely shut them out. Which is crazy to me. So I'm going to say Mets in 6. First off, please take one of these 2 games in LA at the very least. Take one of these 2 games. I never like going 2 down. So take a split here if you can. If you take 2, even better. If you take 2, I could see that, Mets in 5 being a possibility, but I'm going to go Mets in 6. I've been thinking Mets in 6 for a while now, so I'm going to stick with that. I think they have what it takes to get through this series here. Keith Diaz also agreeing Mets in 6. Carlos Ramos saying Mets in 5. Aaron Blue Shirts Banter saying Mets in 6. And Carlos Ortiz, Mets in 5. I mean, everyone's been pretty consistent with us with where their thoughts are on here. CP also agreeing, saying take game 1. Most important thing, the 2-3-2 series setup is just gross, though. I mean, that's been baseball forever. It would be cool if they did that kind of, I guess basketball does it and hockey does it, right? Like it's 2-2-1.
Yeah, but
1,
they
1.
also take 3 days off in between games. Baseball is back-to-back days, which is why the setup is that way. Imagine having to go like for back-to-back days, like game 5 or game 4 is in New York, game 5 is in LA, game 6 is in New York, and game 7 is in LA. So it's different sports, but it also would change the level of strategy with the setup being that way, which is why the Mets just have to win this in 5 so that we can celebrate at Citi Field. Look, I said it's either 5 or 6 for me. If the Mets are going to win this series, if the Dodgers survive their lack of pitching depth to get to a game 7, I just don't like the confidence they're going to go into game 7 with at home. But the Mets have the pitching advantage as far as I'm concerned, and even if the Dodgers have the bullpen advantage, they haven't had the other teams have had the bullpen advantage for the first 3 series that they face. And again, I'm counting the Braves into that.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think the Mets will once again get into another good bullpen and be productive. And if that happens, the Mets should win the series.
Yeah, they should. Carlos Ramos saying we're not going back to Cali. We're closing them at Citi Field. For the first time in Citi Field's history, and as long as Citi Field has been out, I think it's 19 years now, the Mets finally won a home series at home. They won a series
ever.
And to see how the fans took to it, as well as everyone, on this roster, I think it kind of took them back a little bit. And I think they build off of that. I think they want to see this happen at home again. In 2015, they were kind of road warriors. They only won that one series in LA in 2006, but I think the Mets get this done. I would love it for it to be at home, but we've seen them play well on the road enough to know that if it does get to somewhat of a game 6, the thing is, you're not going to see their best pitcher in Flaherty probably. You're not going to see Yamamoto as he pitches either 3 or 4. You're going to get Buehler. You're going to get bullpen. So the Mets have to take advantage of this, the way that this Dodgers team is situated at this moment in time, and take advantage of their pitching staff. Andrew, this has been a fun episode for me to do with you to preview this series. Let everyone know what you got coming up, what you're working on, and let everyone know how things are going in Mets therapy.
So first I want to respond to a clarifying point that Carlos Ortiz made in the chat, where he said that Oral Hershiser pitched on 2 days in a row against the Mets in '88. And I respect the people that remember that series to pointing that out. Hershiser, and I think I have this right, pitched 7 innings in game 3 and got 1 out in game 4. So it's not
same
like
thing. Cone did the same thing. He did terrible in game 2, did not get out of the first inning, came back for game 3 to get the final couple outs of the game. So I think that's a little bit different.
It's
right.
What we're projecting as far as the Bumgardner of it all is that, yes, it would be all hands on deck. You're not getting a ton of depth from Minaya if he goes 7 innings in game 6, and then anything more than just you're a lefty that has to face Ohtani once, which, you know what, may be the difference in the game. So who knows if that's actually the correct way to process that. Anthony, this has been fun. Hopefully, once again, we preview a series and then the Mets go on to win it afterwards. If you want to follow what I'm doing over at Mets Therapy, it's largely a bite-sized operation in which I'm going after every Mets game and processing it on TikTok, on Twitter, on YouTube, on what's the other one? Instagram that I use. So just follow Mets Therapy AC on all your channels and or all your social media networks. And I'm there after every game posting my reaction or my processed mini therapy sessions after each game. So yeah, my preview's up there now. It's largely what we discussed log form here on Subway to Shea. And look, as someone who lives 10 minutes from Citi Field, the subway line, I don't take the 7 train. I take the Long Island Railroad from Bayside. But I always smile anytime I pass that subway to what used to be Shea. And it was an honor to be here to help preview this series with you, Anthony.
Always appreciate you, Andrew. You will be back on this show for sure with me, talking Mets here. And you can make sure, first off, thanks to everyone that's been in the chatting with us the whole entire show. Comments, questions, we appreciate it. 258 of you guys in this room is much appreciated. You can follow Subway to Shea on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway to Shea. You can follow me personally at Ant Rivera 86. This will be up on audio within the next hour, so please subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify if you prefer that. And as always, on YouTube at Subway to Shea as well. Make sure you like and subscribe there. But I hope you guys enjoy this series coming up against the Dodgers here. Let's go Mets. And as always, you gotta believe.